would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews, but now is my kingdom not from hence. And it's actually been about 2,000 years or so since Jesus said this. And he was a king without a kingdom yet. It wasn't part of this world. It wasn't time for his kingdom to reign on the earth. And what's interesting is God wouldn't let Abraham's seed inherit the land until the iniquity of the Amorites was full. It's the same today. God is waiting for the world to get to a point where it's so wicked that then he will bring in his kingdom and he will punish and judge all of his enemies. Amen. All right, the topic of our study today will be a king without a kingdom yet. And we're going to be covering a lot more verses this week. Genesis 22:19 to Genesis 23, verse 20. And the theme or the lesson, I guess, of these verses that we're going to read today would be that we must trust in and patiently wait for God's promises, even if they're a long way off. We're going to look at the outline here of the study. And verses 22, verse 19, we're going to talk about Abraham, the great father, and kind of tie it, since it's Father's Day, we'll take an opportunity to look at Abraham as a model father. Genesis 22, verses 20 through 24, we're going to be talking about Rebekah's family line. Genesis 23, verses 1 through 2, we're going to read about the death of Sarah. Genesis 23, verses 3 to 4, we're going to be talking about Abraham, the stranger in his land or in the land that was promised to him. Genesis 23, verses 5 through 20, a lot of verses there about Abraham purchasing a cave to bury his wife Sarah. But so when you look at all these things, a lot of people would say, well, the book of Genesis, it's easy to say the book of Genesis, just a bunch of historical stories. I want to get revelation or some exciting prophecy. But like many Old Testament scriptures, there are a lot of treasures hidden within the stories, within the historical types in types and examples. So a lot of truths hidden in types and examples. So in other words, some of these things that happened then apply even today. And there are also a lot of moral lessons. There are prophetic lessons, spiritual lessons that can all be gleaned from studying the Old Testament. And this one, we're going to see a really neat thing, even a type of Jesus, how he was a king without a kingdom yet when he was on the earth. All right? So let's turn to Genesis 22, verse 19. And it reads, So Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt at Beersheba. Now, last week we talked about the three promises that were given to Abraham. And right in that, earlier on in that chapter, Abraham brought up his son Isaac to have him sacrificed. Of course, God stopped that from happening, and he didn't have to go through with that. But here, now he leaves where he was, and he goes to Beersheba. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's stop for a minute and talk about Abraham, since it's Father's Day. Abraham, we know, is known as the perfect father. His name actually means, anybody know what his name means? Abraham, the father of many nations. The prime root of his name, Abe, actually means father. So it's interesting that God would name him that. No doubt, I believe he named him that because he is the mark or the example of what every father should strive for, to be like Abraham. Genesis 18, verse 18. Pull it up on 18, verse 18 and 19, actually. I don't know if I have... No, yeah, we'll just go with that verse there. God says concerning Abraham that, For I know him that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken of him. So God blessed Abraham greatly and was going to make him, into a mighty great nation. Kings were going to come out of his loins. His seed was going to be as numerous as the stars of heaven and of the sand of the sea. Because of this, God says, I know him. I know what he's like. I know what he's going to do. He's going to command his children and his household after him that they should keep the way of the Lord. So, when we talk about this commanding, the world today kind of freaks out about this. They think that a man should now be effeminate and weak and not very manly anymore. And they would consider somebody who'd want to command their household to fall after God as an evil, bigoted, dangerous man. Those dangerous Christian men that lead their families. Now, we're not talking about, when we talk about the word command, we're not talking about a dictator or a tyrant of the house, ruling his house, saying, I command you, wife, you do this, you kids, you do that. It's having a commanding presence in that you're leading your family in the truth with love. And sometimes it does take discipline. Sometimes there are times to administer discipline to your family. And so those are duties of a father, to command their children and their household after them, to lead their family, to keep the way of the Lord, and also to teach kids the difference between right and wrong, justice and judgment. That means to do what's right. Unfortunately, we've lost this in America today in many respects, in that fathers don't teach their children the Bible anymore. They don't lead them, and they don't lead their houses towards God, their households toward God. And we run into what we're running into now is a society that's rejecting God, a rebellious society, a society without any male leadership. And it's a sad thing. But it's interesting that instead of these types of fathers being honored today, a father that will lead his household to the Lord with a commanding presence, society now celebrates the effeminate men. If you're effeminate and you're very non-manly, then you're loved by society today. You're accepted. And you see how backwards that is. That's not what a man is. That's not what a father is. A father is not an effeminate weakling. He's not a pushover. He's a leader. Being that it's Father's Day, we think of how we got to this country today. We got to this country today because of fathers that did spread the truth to their children, taught them the Bible, led them towards God. Had our forefathers never did that, we talked about it last week a lot about the pilgrims. That's what they came here for, to spread the gospel of the kingdom, to live according to the ways of God, and they passed that on to their children, generation after generation after generation. And that's why Abraham was chosen. And no doubt that's why America was chosen to be such a great nation, is because our forefathers, the dads of our country, did what they were supposed to do in many cases. So we can be thankful to not only to our dads today, but also to our forefathers that taught their children the truth and gave us such a blessed nation. All right, moving on. Rebekah's genealogy is given in Genesis chapter 22. We're going to read that now through 24. And some might say, well, why would this genealogy be here? Does anybody have an idea why this genealogy would be here? Why is it important? Anybody know? Earlier on, so Abraham was sojourning in the land of Canaan, and earlier on God had cursed Canaan, placed a curse upon Canaan because of, I think it was Ham saw his father's nakedness and such. So it was important that Isaac would not marry a Canaanite because they were living among the heathen there. So this family line had to be documented to not be a Canaanite. In fact, God warned, in another place, God actually warned Abraham, I think it was to Abraham or to Isaac, or I think it was Abraham and his servants. He said, do not let Isaac take a wife of the Canaanites. Now the lesson for us today would be that were supposed to marry only Christians, have a Christian marriage, because otherwise you could be led astray, led away from God. So here we go. And verse 20, it says, "And it came to pass after these things that it was told Abraham, saying, Behold, Milcah, she hath also borne children unto thy brother Nahor, Huz his firstborn, and Buz his brother, and Camil the father of Aram, and Chesed, and Hazo, and Pildash, and Jilpah, and Bethuel." All right, "And Bethuel begat Rebekah. These 8 Milcah did bear to Nahor, Abraham's brother." So this would actually be, Rebekah would be Abraham's brother's son's daughter. So whatever that would be, what cousin would that be? Anybody know?
Say it again.
Rebekah would be Abraham's brother's son's daughter.
It would be a cousin once removed.
That's what you would call that? Okay. All right, so it's interesting. It says here, "These 8 Milcah did bear to Nahor, Abraham's brother." In biblical numerics or biblical numerology, 8 means a new beginning. And interestingly, the great matriarch Sarah is about to pass away, and Rebekah, the purpose of this genealogy was for, would take her place as the mother of the promised seed, and there would be a new beginning. Dr. Bullinger in the Companion Bible illustrates this by saying, the reason this genealogy is given right before the death of Sarah is that one sun is rising before another sets. I thought that was an interesting way to put it. Verse 24, "And his concubine, whose name was Rumah, she bare also Teba, and Gaham, and Thahash." Boy, these names get pretty fun to pronounce here. "And Maacah." All right, so, and his concubine. So Nahor, Abraham's brother, had 8 sons by his wife, and 4 by these concubine, giving us a total number of sons equal to 12. So he had, interesting, we have the 12 tribes of Israel and so forth. Don't know if there's a direct correlation there, but number 12 is always an interesting number. All right, chapter 23, verse 1, we're going to talk about the death of Sarah here now. "And Sarah was 107 and 20 years old. These were the years of the life of Sarah." So, Sarah is the only woman, this is interesting, she's the only woman whose age is mentioned in the Bible. So she must be a very special woman for a special purpose. She was 90 when she gave birth to Isaac. And so if you do the math, you figure out she got to enjoy about 37 years of being able to see Isaac grow and develop into a man, see her promised seed. Verse 2, "And Sarah died in Kirjath Arba, the same as Hebron in the land of Canaan, and Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her." All right, so Ecclesiastes 3 verse 4 says that there's a time, that whole chapter talks about there's a time for laughing, a time for celebrating, a time of war, a time of peace, but there's also a time of mourning, and this was Abraham's time. I mean, no doubt he loved Sarah very much. I mean, not only because she was a beautiful woman, so beautiful that he was afraid to travel into the different countries with her because he thought powerful men and kings would kill him to steal his wife. But obviously it was much deeper than just her beauty. He was really mourning for her here. Sarah's name means princess, and there is more said about Sarah being blessed even than that of Mary, the mother of Jesus. In Galatians chapter 4, verse 26, Sarah is actually likened to New Jerusalem, heavenly Jerusalem, and she's called the mother of all the children of promise. That would be all the children that receive the promises of God. She was a symbol of the new covenant even. So when we're going to read about her death, there's a reason why God's got a whole chapter in here about her death. This is a time Abraham was honoring her. She was a woman to be honored. In one place it says that God promised that Abraham would be a father of many nations, but that kings and nations would come. She would give birth to kings and rulers and entire nations. In Isaiah 51, verses 1 through 2, I don't have this on the slide there, Jacob, but it says, God says, "Hearken to me, ye that follow after righteousness, ye that seek the Lord, look unto the rock whence you are hewn, and to the hole of the pit whence you are digged." Now check this out. "Look unto Abraham your father, and unto Sarah that bare you." So God tells us, those that follow after righteousness, today that would be God's people, it would be the Christians, to look at Abraham. We talked about him earlier. He was the model father. He taught his household. But he also says, look to Sarah. This is the rock that you came from. This is the mother and father of all the righteous people on the earth. 1 Peter chapter 3 verse 6 talks about Sarah as being not only being the model mother, but also the model wife. It says, "Even as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters you are, as long as you do well." So Sarah was not only a great wife, she was also submissive. She showed respect to her husband. So you got Abraham, the great leader, and you got the mother here as the great matriarch, but also willing to submit to her husband. So here we go. Moving on. Verse 3. "And Abraham stood up before the dead and spake before his dead," that'd be Sarah, "and spake unto the sons of Heth, saying," now the sons of Heth, this is interesting, these were actually, in Genesis chapter 10, verse 15, it says Heth was a son of Canaan. So these were Canaanites that Abraham was dwelling among. He was actually in the land of Canaan right now. As this next verse will say, verse 4, he says, "I am a stranger and a sojourner with you. Give me a possession of a burying place with you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight." So let's talk about this. Abraham said he's a stranger and a sojourner. God had promised him the land that he was actually traveling in Genesis chapter 15 through 18 through 21 talks about that. But so he's in this land that God promised him, and he's a stranger and a sojourner. He was a king, if you would, without a kingdom. He was a man dwelling in tents, having no physical possession, or no, as far as land is concerned. He had no permanent dwelling place. All he had with him was his tents, his livestock, his family, and his workers, just sojourning through the land. And it wouldn't be until about 400 years later that his seed would inherit this land that God promised him. Now, a lot of people could say, how did Abraham do it? God made him all these promises, but they don't actually really apply to him. He says, "I'm going to give you this land," but now he's like, "Oh, that's," some people would look at it and say, "Oh, that's a great promise," but it doesn't. I don't get it right now. This is 400 years later. The 400 years later is talked about in Genesis 15, verse 16, where God says, "I will not give you the land." Now check this out. "Until the iniquity of the Amorites was full." In other words, until the inhabitants of the land of Canaan, until their sins reached a point where God would then judge him, he was not going to give them the land. So he wasn't going to dispel the inhabitants of the land without a just or righteous cause. God wasn't going to do that. But interesting, God knew the exact time, 400 years. He knew that their sins were going to get so bad that God would then command that they be removed from the land, the Canaanites, and then Abraham's seed would then possess the land. But so here he is now. So you look at this. Abraham, though he didn't receive the promises yet, he was a king of kings even, because he was the father of all these kings that would become. He was a king of kings and lord of lords, if you would, a type of Jesus. With no kingdom yet, but he still obeyed and did his day-to-day service to God, doing what was right. today we can think of it as, we've been given promises concerning the kingdom of heaven. And people die, and many Christians die and are born generation after generation and have not seen the coming of the kingdom. They haven't seen Jesus come yet. So this is a type of how Abraham had the patience and the faith to wait, and it wasn't all about him. He knew that it would eventually be possessed by his seed. So he was a father that didn't just look for the near term, what are we going to get right here and right now? He set his children up for the future. He set his children up by teaching them the Word of God, like we talked about earlier, so that they would be prepared to be possessors of all of his promises. All right? So Abraham, he was a stranger and a sojourner in the promised land. I talked about it a little bit, but Jesus was also a stranger in his own kingdom. I can remember the time when Jesus told Pilate, "My kingdom is not of this world." This is in John 18, verse 36. He says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence." And it's actually been about 2,000 years or so since Jesus said this. And he was a king without a kingdom yet. It wasn't part of this world. It wasn't time for his kingdom to reign on the earth. And what's interesting is God wouldn't let Abraham's seed inherit the land until the iniquity of the Amorites was full. It's the same today. God is waiting for the world to get to a point where it's so wicked that then he will bring in his kingdom, and he will punish and judge all of his enemies. So here you got, some people mock Christianity, and they'll say in, I think it's 2 Peter chapter 3, many people would say, Peter warned that many people would say, where is the promise of his coming? Things keep going on as they were since the beginning of creation. People die, people are born, people are die, people are born. But if you look at the type of Abraham, it came to pass exactly 400 years. I can't remember the exact, there's a scripture that says it came to pass on the exact day from when God promised that he would inherit the land to the day that the Israelites entered the land. On the exact day. So it lets us know that, yes, there are periods of time where God makes a promise, but we have to patiently wait. We might come and go and die and not see it, but others eventually will. All right. Now, talking about what it would be like just before Jesus came back, I forgot to mention this. Like God was waiting for the Amorites for their iniquity to be full. Daniel chapter 8, let me see, where is that? Daniel chapter 8, verse 23, kind of talks about how right before Jesus comes back, that the transgressors will come to the full in the latter time of their kingdom. So it's kind of the same exact statement as you'll see from Genesis 15, verse 16. And so we know the Antichrist will be here. He'll rule for 3.5 years, but it won't be until after all that wickedness reached its pinnacle, reached its peak, that Jesus will come back in Revelation chapter 19 on a white horse and defeat all of his enemies. All right? All right, so this brings us to, we're still talking about strangers and sojourners. Now, we are strangers and sojourners in the earth today. In a sense, we too are kings without a kingdom. In Revelation chapter 1, it talks about how God's people are kings and priests on this earth. But we're not, we're not technically reigning here at this time. We're treated poorly like Jesus was treated. We're kind of like Abraham's. Today now we live in a society where gay pride and everything is cool and hip. And these people the people that are in control in many instances are not the lawful rulers that God will eventually have put in place. It'll be the Christians. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11, Peter addresses the early Christians as strangers and pilgrims. But there is a little bit of a caveat to this. we talk about how we are strangers and pilgrims, but when this nation was founded, interestingly, it was founded by pilgrims seeking a heavenly place, in a sense, in their mind. They're seeking a place where they could live out the gospel. But they were actually setting up the people as the kings and rulers of America. The Constitution of the United States says, "We the people." So we the people are the kings, supposed to be the kings and rulers of America. So in one sense, we have received some of these promises in type, as far as being kings and rulers. Every citizen of America is a joint heir of the promises of Abraham, in the sense that they do have somewhat of a kingdom. Excuse me. Upon reaching the shores of America, is kind of tying into what we were talking about last week, the pilgrims looked at America as the new land of promise, the new world, the new Jerusalem. And they viewed the King of England as the Pharaoh. They viewed the Atlantic Ocean as the Red Sea. And they viewed, now check this out, they viewed the Indians that had lived here as the Canaanites. And God did eventually remove the Indians' power from America. And a lot of people cry and whine about that, but it happened before. I mean, we know there were some grotesque heathen practices that the Indians practiced. And no doubt it was the time for them to be judged and for a new people, for God's people to inherit this land. President Thomas Jefferson said, "I shall need too the favor of that being in whose hands we are, who led our fathers as Israel of old from their native land and planted them in a country flowing with all the necessaries and comforts of life." So again, the whole point of talking about this is Abraham was a stranger and a sojourner in a strange land that was promised to him. We can't entirely relate to him in that sense because we were given this country, America. So we've inherited a lot. I guess we could say we've gotten a big chunk of that inheritance as almost a down payment. We're blowing it. We're wasting it right now. But nevertheless, we are a very blessed people beyond what we sometimes even appreciate. All right. I guess I'll say one more thing about this. Revelation chapter 12, I believe, foretells, because Abraham's in this land, this promised land. It was a place that God had prepared for him. He wasn't going to get it for about 400 years. But America, you look at it, it was kind of sitting over here for thousands of years. And in Revelation chapter 12, it reads here, you guys don't have to turn there, but I'm just going to quote there. It reads, "And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. And to the woman were given two wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a times and a half a time from the face of the serpent." So this woman, that no doubt represents the children, the mother actually would be, I believe, Sarah. She was wearing a crown of 12 stars. Eventually, through Sarah's line, would come Mary, and then Mary would give birth to the Christ child. But the woman represents God's people. And there was this place that God had prepared for her. It wasn't in Israel. Now today we got the people that make such a big deal about 1948. That'll be another topic for another time. But in the end times, God's people, Israel, spiritual Israel or biological Israel, whatever you want to say, was to be in this wilderness land. And the two wings of the great eagle would kind of be the symbol of that land. And what do we have what's America's national bird or national standard? It's the bald eagle, a symbol of God directing and protecting and overshadowing his people. So into the wilderness, into her place. It didn't say Jerusalem in the end. They're getting away from the serpent. Now, it's interesting when you read about all of our forefathers, that's exactly what they were doing. They were getting away from the serpent trying to oppress them with false religion. And they were chased, and the serpent actually chased the woman as that group of people on the Mayflower came here and set up this nation, chased the woman and tried to stop her from building this great nation. But then we had the Revolutionary War and all that, and the rest is history there. All right. 23 verse 5. And the children of Heth answered Abraham, saying unto him, now Heth actually, I didn't talk about it, but Heth was a Hittite. He was a Hittite. He says, hear us, my Lord, thou art a mighty prince among us. In the choice of our sepulchres, bury thy dead. None of us shall withhold from thee his sepulchre, but that thou mayest bury thy dead. So it's evident here that Abraham had a good relationship with these Hittites. And you might think, these are pagans, these are heathens. We hate pagans and heathens. They all should go to hell. But Abraham didn't treat them like that. I mean, he's a good example of how we should treat non-believers today. If at all possible, get along with them. Abraham, no doubt, he was called a mighty prince, or in the Hebrew it means prince of God, by these people. He was respected by these Hittites. No doubt they saw his work ethic, they saw his honesty, his integrity in his dealings with them. We're going to find out that he actually respected their culture. And there was something even deeper than this. Genesis chapter 14, verses 13 and 24 says that Abraham was confederate with him in this battle that they fought against. I think it was the one of the kings of Canaan, I think. You'll have to check out. But you'll find out that he was actually confederate with these people that were non-believers, so to speak. So let's see here. Now, think about this. If Abraham was a shady character, they told him, hey, go ahead, you can bury your wife, no problem. They have a good relationship here. If Abraham was a shady character and was rude to them and didn't appreciate that they allowed him to sojourn in their land, they would have never responded like this. And we can think of it today in our places of work, wherever we go, is to think and be like Abraham. If you claim to be a Christian and you're walking around acting very bitter and just I'm trying to think of the words, but just unchristian-like, that's not going to set a good example. As Christians, we should be respected even among non-believers, as far as the non-believers that are not opposing you. I'm not saying that we should go shake hands with the LGBTQ movement and say, hey, we're right with you, we support you, everything like that. There is a time for getting along to get along, and then there's a time for war. And we are to oppose liberal institutions and the liberal agenda. We're not supposed to be friends with them. But individual liberals, if we work with them and we deal with them, then we treat them with respect. We're honest with them. We're fair with them and things like that. We don't just look at them and say, you liberal, you piece of crap, I'm not talking to you, or something like that. That's just not going to do anybody any good. It's not going to be good for God's kingdom. I could think of Jesus, some people would take this too far and say, we're supposed to really just get along with the heathen, But there was a time when Jesus actually provoked the Pharisees to open spiritual warfare. He did things to get them to fight against him. Like he purposely would do some healings on the Sabbath and things like that. So the point is, these were non-believers that were allied with Abraham. They got along. I don't like to use the word coexist because that's got a bad, bad taste. But Jesus, when there was a time to make, there's like Ecclesiastes chapter 3 says, there's a time to mourn, and there's also a time for war. And being that the Pharisees had set themselves up and the damage they were doing to set themselves up as the teachers and the authorities of God, they were doing so much damage that it was time to declare war against them. All right, verse 7. I could also think of the time when Jesus went into the temple to cleanse the temple. He wasn't about just to be nice. He wasn't about being nice and cordial with the money changers in the temple. He actually planned that out and actually sat there and made a whip. I think it had 9 whips on it. So it was premeditated. He sat and thought about it. Okay, I'm going to make this whip, and I'm going to go in there, and I'm going to start swinging that whip around and tossing tables over. But at this time, this wasn't the right time for Abraham to do that. And Abraham stood up, verse 7, and Abraham stood up and bowed himself to the people of the land, even to the children of Heth. Now, again, Abraham's showing respect. Says no doubt he's just performing the custom, bowing down, showing respect to the people. He didn't abuse their kindness. He wasn't rude. Though it was his land, God promised it to him. He wasn't walking around saying, "Just wait, buddy. One day I'm king of this land, and you're going to be my servant," or your people will be my servant. But this is a great example of how strangers and sojourners that come to America should act. Unfortunately, today we have all these illegal aliens. They come here. They're not respectful like Abraham was. They come here and they trample upon everything that our country stands for. They say, we demand this right, we demand that right. Abraham didn't come there demanding. He was asking. He was pleasant. And the liberals today support this rude behavior. These people that come into our country to actually take it over. Rather than submit to our customs and be respectful to our ways of life. So you hear you'll see a lot of people trying to quote Bible verses in support of illegal immigration, and they'll say, well, look at Jesus says to be kind to the stranger and the sojourner. He didn't say you make them a citizen. He didn't say you give them all these rights. And he didn't say you could just let them violate the law and be disrespectful and trample upon. Imagine if somebody came into your house and said, I demand that you open the door up right now. I'm coming in and you're going to feed me. And they come in and they trash your house. They leave trash everywhere and they disrespect you. So what those Christians are telling us is we should just always take that and accept that because we want to be nice to the stranger. It's obvious when we're reading these things, there's a time and a place for everything. Context is the key. All right. Let's turn to, actually, Jacob, I got a reference on here. This is interesting, being that we're talking about how people should be respectful and civil towards one another. Matthew Henry, he's a Bible commentator. This is from the blueletterbible.com. He says, with a tender of the best of their bearing places, note, even the light of nature teaches us to be civil and respectful towards all, though they be strangers and sojourners. The noble generosity of these Canaanites shames and condemns the closeness and selfishness and ill humor of many that call themselves Israelites today, the Jews today. Observe, these Canaanites would be glad to mingle their dust with Abraham's and to have their last end like his. But you look at a lot of the present day Jews today, this kind of applies to many of the non-believing ones. But this also applies to people who claim to be Christians. There are some non-believers that actually shame and condemn, that act more civil than some people that claim to be Christians. And that's not good for God's kingdom. Verse 8, 23 verse 8, and he communed with them, saying, if it be your mind that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me and entreat me to Ephron, the son of Zohar. So he's asking for this guy. He says, I want you to talk to this guy named Ephron. Verse 9, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he hath, this is verse 9, which is in the end of the field, for as much money as it is worth, he shall give it me for a possession of a burying place amongst you. So Machpelah actually means the double cave. And Abraham would later be buried in this cave. And we'll talk about other people as well. But it means a double cave. No doubt there was like two major chambers in this cave. Probably one that would be for the men and one for the women maybe. As we're going to find out, other patriarchs were buried here and matriarchs. But this is interesting. No doubt Abraham chose this place as a burying place in, what does it say, in Ephron, this land that Ephron owned, because this was the specific piece of land where God made all the promises to Abraham. This is the place where God came and talked to Abraham. And there's no doubt that's why he wanted to have Sarah buried there. It was a very special place. Verse 10, and Ephron dwelt among the children of Heth, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the audience of the children of Heth, even all that went in at the gate of his city, saying, now the gate of the city, we talked about it last week a little bit. In Bible times, the gates of the city is where all of the town's leaders assembled, where the business transactions took place, and the such. So all the leaders of the community are here right now, and Abraham's there making a request. Verse 11, nay, my Lord, hear me, the field give I thee, and the cave that is therein I give it thee. In the presence of the sons of my people give I it thee, bury thy dead. So we see here kindness shown by Abraham and respect, and he's getting kindness back in return. You know, this guy was actually, these guys respected Abraham so much, these non-believers respected Abraham so much that they were actually this guy was just willing to give him this piece of property. Again, a great example of civility even among those that have different belief systems. Verse 12, and Abraham bowed down himself before the people of the land, showing respect and courtesy again. Verse 13, and he spake unto Ephron in the audience of the people of the land, saying, but if thou wilt give it, I pray thee, hear me, I will give thee money for the field, take it of me, and I will bury the dead there. So Abraham wanted to pay for the field. He didn't just want it given to him. I believe, in part, Abraham probably wanted to make sure he had the title deed to the land, because if somebody just gave it to you, it's a little hard to lay claim to that land in the future if another generation rises up and says, no, that's not your land, that was my dad's land. Now Abraham has the title deed, he bought the land, it's his, and he owns it. And what's interesting about this is Abraham was a stranger and a sojourner in the land. His seed would not inherit this land until 400 years later, but Abraham actually acquires the first piece of the promised land in buying this burial place for Sarah. Verse 14, and Ephron answered Abraham, saying unto him, my Lord, verse 15, my Lord, hearken unto me, the land is worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that betwixt me and thee? Bury therefore thy dead. So 400 shekels of silver. Now 400 is an interesting number. I don't believe this number is here by accident. Again, I kept saying it, 400 years later, as Genesis 15 verse 13 states, that would be the time that his seed would inherit the land. There's 400. He paid 400 shekels of silver for the small piece of land that his seed would conquer in 400 years. And I happened to, while doing some research, I actually happened to find something else interesting about the number 400. The year 2020 will mark the 400th anniversary of the founding of America by the Pilgrims that landed on Plymouth Rock. In fact, there's a big rock there called Plymouth Rock, stamped on there 1620. So that's significant. Because America, we think of America as being founded in 1776. That was a significant day as well. But it was essentially founded as a Christian nation in the year 1620 on that rock. That was the foundation stone. The rock, I have no doubt, that Plymouth Rock no doubt symbolized Jesus Christ, the rock upon which this nation was built. And but when you look back throughout the Bible, 400 is a number that could be said to be a prophetic benchmark. So when we come on the year 2020, maybe we're going to see a big change, a big shift, either good or bad for America, possibly. God seems to use that number 400 when dealing with nations and longer periods of time. So this other guy was rich. He's just like to Abraham, he's like, hey, what's 400 shekels of silver? I just want to give you the land. 400 shekels. Abraham was rich, even though he was a traveler. This other guy was rich, and he was just like, hey, why bother with it? I mean, if you want to pay me, that's fine. I'll accept it, but it's a pretty small deal for wealthy guys like us. Verse 16, and Abraham hearkened unto Ephron, and Abraham weighed to Ephron the silver, and he named in the audience of the sons of Heth 400 shekels of silver, current money with the merchant. Now, this is actually the first time the word shekels is used in the Bible. Shekels were, it was a standard weight of measurement for precious metals. In this case, it's a coin that weighed a shekel. Now, today we have a worthless money system that can be controlled by the money changers called Federal Reserve notes. It's not actually weighed out. It doesn't weigh anything. It's not really worth anything. It's only worth what the Federal Reserve says it's worth. I just thought that was interesting. It was real money that Abraham had paid for this. Verse 17, and the field of Ephron, which is in Machpelah, which was before Mamre, the field, and the cave which was therein, and all the trees that were in the field, and that were in all the borders round about were made sure. Okay, the deal was complete. Unto Abraham, verse 18, unto Abraham for a possession, remember that's his first piece of the promised land, for a possession in the presence of the children of Heth, before all that went in at the gate of his city. All that went in at the gate of the city. Verse 19, and after this, Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre. The same is Hebron in the land of Canaan. Verse 20, and the field and the cave that is therein were made sure unto Abraham for a possession of a burying place by the sons of Heth. Now this burying place that Abraham bought is known today, you can do a little Google search on it, as the tomb of the patriarchs. They said that this is still there today, and they say that the bodies are still there. They actually say that Abraham, not only was Sarah buried there, but Abraham was buried there as well, along with Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and Leah. The three principal families of God's kingdom. Those that, what's that? Jacob and Rachel. I said Leah, didn't I? I got a typo. I better fix my. I put these. I put the study up online in a written format as well. So it's a good thing she pointed that out. Otherwise, I'd say Leah. He picked his favorite wife to be buried there with him. I don't know if that's fair or not, but nevertheless. So in conclusion, we too, even though in America we've got a big chunk of this inheritance, but we too are kings and rulers without a kingdom. Just like Jesus was, just like Abraham was. But just like Sarah, Sarah, she died without having received these promises. In the book of Hebrews, it talks about all these people, Abraham and Sarah, they all died not having yet received the promise. So Sarah died not having seen those promises fulfilled, which is kind of a lesson for us. People will come and go, be born and die before Jesus returns or before all the promises are fulfilled, and that's normal. We live our lives by the hope of that promise. We live our lives in faith, knowing that these things will come to pass, knowing that Jesus will return, he will set up his kingdom, and we will inherit the New Jerusalem as our homeland. I can think of it in one place. Jesus told the 12 apostles that one day they would sit on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So it's pretty fascinating. When you do a study like this, I'm not going to get into you could have theological debates with people over what and John likes these big terms, preterism, amillennialism, and premillennialism, all these terms about the end times. This study, for those people watching, some might get into that. This study actually documents that Jesus' kingdom is here in part, but it's still not yet, which means the premillennial view, I think, is the strongest biblical view, because we just read a whole type of it, where Abraham he was given a promise, but he had to wait a long period of time before it actually came to pass. With that said, we'll take any questions or comments. Almost. We went 3 minutes over. Try to keep them to 45 minutes, but.
I had a couple questions. Well, one, 2020 is when Trump gets reelected.
I was just going to say.
Oh, really?
election.
If he
Yeah,
gets
yeah. I guess that is the election next year,
If
right?
he gets reelected, I think that'll be a huge, huge blow to the left and the beast and the evil, because they're trying everything they can to make him out to be the most horrible person in the world, and I think it's working in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But it's also not working. So I just think it's going to be a big test to America, because if Trump gets reelected, it'll be very, very positive moment in our history.
Yeah, we don't know. Jesus said we don't know. Like Abraham actually knew the exact amount of years before his seed would inherit the land. We don't. Jesus told us that no man knows the exact hour when Jesus will return. But there are patterns in history based off of numbers of years, like the 400, where nations rise and come. There's one that I didn't talk about at all today here, and maybe we will someday. But the year 1776 was 2,520 years that were, I don't want to go too deep into this. I'll just say it like this. It was 2,520 years, which in Leviticus was equal to the 7 times punishment that God would punish Israel. And that, from the day that the Israelites were taken into captivity by the Assyrians, the Manasseh, the specific tribe Manasseh, till America was born was exactly 20 years. So when you're looking at these big periods of time, and God works, He's very organized. You look at nature, you look at a leaf, there's patterns in everything. And He knows when things are going to happen, when they come to pass. God's not a hodgepodge God where things are not organized. He's got a whole plan laid out. He knows what's going to happen when.
Yeah, it's not that Trump is some great God figure, but it's just he represents, to me, a Christian nation, and he's very pro-Christian and
Right.
Freedom of to be a Christian, and not be in trouble for believing what you believe.
You're bringing up a good point, because people would look at Trump and say, well, he's definitely not like Abraham, not a godly, respectful man. But they forget Abraham actually went to war and led some military campaigns. And right now America's in a time of war. We talked about how Abraham was very respectful to the heathen that lived among them, but that's only when it's possible. And you don't be respectful to non-believers that are taking advantage of you. Now I'm going to make this a political statement a little bit, but the liberals have been taking advantage of Christian conservatives that are trying to be very cordial, very nice all throughout these years, but the liberals have a sinister agenda. They're so nice to us, but we'll just use their niceness against them and keep taking from them. We'll never give anything back in return. They'll just keep conquering us. Well, then I think it does take a guy with the mannerism of Trump to come along and not play Mr. Nice Guy anymore, because they've already declared war against us. We are in a war for the heart and soul of our country right now, and warfare is not pretty. And he uses those tactics when he's ridiculing people and insulting them. That's tactical warfare. I don't think it's because he enjoys it. I think he knows it's a way to get things accomplished.
Yeah.
Way to get your enemy off his feet.
And they realize we're not playing nice anymore.
Mm-hmm.
To me, every president always, every president that I remember said, "Well, I'm a Christian man." They all say it, except for one, Obama. I mean, he may have said he was a Christian, but didn't he do everything with the Quran? Didn't he take his oath out with the Quran instead of a Bible?
I think he did it on,
I don't think he used either.
I think it was Abraham Lincoln's Bible.
Well, I know
I think it was.
the Quran for other things,
But yeah, he was very Muslim and pro.
Yeah, but I mean, all the other presidents, I'm a wonderful Christian man, and who knows what they really are.
Right.
Yeah, well, Obama was very deceptive. He knew when to say he was a Christian, but like you're saying, everything he did was it was non-Christian. It was anti-Christian. Everything he did, every policy.
To be that way.
Yeah.
He was a split personality kind of guy,
Right.
I can relate to that myself.
And Trump isn't out there claiming to be this great Christian, but yet every time I see something on Facebook, there's a group of people in the White House, praying over him, or he's at a church and they're
Yep.
laying hands on him, and he's very open to making God the center of our country, which is so refreshing.
Being a Christian does not mean we're not sinners.
Yeah.
So
Right, and
you can be a Christian, you're a sinner. Jesus came for us.
Right.
So, I mean, just to say every president, is a bad person so he can't be a Christian, that doesn't go together, you know what I mean? You try to be as
Talk
good
is cheap,
Christian as you can, you know what I mean? Unless,
Right.
only God knows if they're deceiving us, or if they really have a Christian heart, and they're fighting the same battles we fight,
Right.
probably more so, because they have to run a huge country, and they have huge people at them, and then we forget there's the devil, the biggest deceiver of them all.
Right. And
And he's got
tries to
a
look
big
good.
smile on his face right now.
Yeah.
Especially in Minneapolis right now.
No,
Yeah.
but in general, he's, it's the way he believed it was gonna happen, and it's happening. He thinks he can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, he thinks he'll be victorious.
What better way to use Christianity against God,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing.
And he's doing
they're good at. They're good at deception. They turn everything around and make it look like, to people that aren't paying attention, that the conservatives, the Christians, are the ones that are haters and evil and closed-minded, and when it's completely them, but yet they do such a good job of deceiving people that they buy it.
And I feel like you said about Abraham, okay, Abraham knew what he was supposed to believe, he knew what he was supposed to tell people or witness for people, but he still didn't have to agree with them. You can disagree with people without tearing them down.
Right.
And as a Christian, they look at you and go, well, they see the good part of Christianity instead of the human part of Christianity. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Sure. Yeah.
So I just feel that as Abraham did, and kind of that's what we're supposed to do, is yes, don't back down from what we believe. If it comes to us where it's a question, do you believe this? You know what I mean?
Right.
That we have to stand up for. But as far as being a loving person, maybe not believing what they believe, they can sway over to that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
It's like Hitler.
I'm just saying, that happened to me in work lots of times, where I was with a lot of, in my last job, I was with a lot of gay men in our where I work. I never once did I was as nice as I could be, but I never once, we were in conversations where I believe that's right, but I still love you,
Right. Yeah.
Right, that's the only way you're gonna convert people,
Yeah.
if there's a chance to convert them. If you're just defiant and hating, this is gonna push them further away.
Right.
But again, like you said, if you're confronted and it's like, you believe.
Yeah, I mean,
this,
then-
yeah, I've done that before. I've said that. Like,
Well,
people-
Ben would probably know more about college teachings and like Hitler. I mean, he took the youth of a whole entire nation and brainwashed them. And our country's going through the same thing with professors, colleges.
Well, there's
You're
indoctrination
smart to
going
be,
on,
I think there should be a lot more homeschooling than sending your kid to the place of hell, the walls of hell.
But yeah, we need
Some are better than others.
we need
Well, I'm
those
serious.
Christian people, students out there. You know what I mean?
Right.
Showing them, what Jesus means, what Jesus wants, without condemning them. I mean, yeah, I don't believe in what you're doing, but yeah, professors the devil's with teaching our kids.
Yeah.
All I gotta say is you're an abomination. That's it.
The first-
Done deal.
The first year old school, John, you know. There was either it's this way or that way, and it really is this way or that way.
Yeah.
But it's how you go about.
Yeah, there's a strategy or tact, you know.
So we
We're
should
supposed
all
to be
be
tactical.
politicians.
You know, I don't know, but
Well, I mean, Abraham, he was tactical. I mean,
Yeah.
he got along with those guys. And
yeah.
he even made an alliance when it benefited him. Is that mine? dude?
No, that's John's banging out
Doesn't,
here.
you
I
can put it on.
turned all the way down.
I know, but there's a thing you can
I
put
just-
on.
I thought I saw mine going across the street.
I don't know what's going on.
It could be mine because it might be, the sound might be coming through here.
I'm stupid when it comes to
The,
smartphones.
I had a question that just shows my lack of knowledge sometimes.
I've often wondered where the change came from, because the Muslims also believe many wives, as the Old Testament, many wives. When did that change come over into our life, where no, not many wives, only one? Where did that come from?
That's a good point. I've always wondered that myself. I haven't really studied that one in depth.
I just think they were right back then.
He would, but
You can have more than one.
I'm just saying, you know,
None.
there's so
Paul was
many
right.
of the Old Testament people that still live that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if the Amish are Old Testament or
Mormons.
Mormons are Old Testament, I think. No, because don't the Mormons believe in Jesus? No, they believe he was a prophet only, right?
Yeah,
I
it
don't know
gets
what they
it gets kind of technical, but yeah, they seem to downgrade his deity.
But most of the people that are that way live in the Old Testament, and that means you can have it. If you take it, it shows you can have many wives.
Yeah.
Had to be a
Where
time
did
when
that
it
change
changed.
in the new? When? Why?
I
I don't know.
guess when
Doesn't
Jesus
really-
came in the new covenant.
It is
I've
important. I
never
think
found
it
a
is
place where it
important.
says now, like man will live 120 years instead of 900. That he went through that, but he never said now man shall. Well, Adam and Eve he kind of did in a way.
I guess
This is
Adam
your
and
wife,
Eve would be the beginning.
This is your wife.
Yeah.
But
But then now, didn't that happen? But after Adam and Eve, that's when
Right.
Abraham and all them had many wives.
yeah, I don't know.
But
Yeah.
in the New
So what about
Testament,
Solomon?
they don't have many wives.
He was the king of wives.
And it did seem to be God didn't seem to look down upon that. You know, with I mean, all the tribes of Israel, they came from 4 different
Yeah.
women.
But and there's a scripture in the New Testament that says the son will leave the home and
Cling
become
unto
one with
Yeah.
one woman.
I don't. The
It doesn't
argument.
say one
But
woman.
it had to
says
be
a
in the
woman.
Old Testament where it changed, because it already had changed in the New Testament. It had to be somewhere.
I know
where it changed.
the argument of a lot that many people make is they say that it was a cultural thing among the whole world at that time, that people could have multiple wives, and then God just didn't make a law against it at that time, but his people just lived.
So the Arabs are right.
They're right according to the Old
I'm just
Testament.
kidding.
Yeah, but I don't know, that's one of those questions that I've always kind of wondered about.
Well, usually,
You always wondered about that?
well, I mean, usually it shows.
Or like,
It shows
why
that
did he allow it? Why did he allow
what
it?
the change is. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Kind of the. Was it just an American thing or was it a godly thing?
Yeah.
What changed that?
I don't.
Oh,
remember.
I think it was basically the New Testament is when Christians stopped doing that.
Yeah, but
As far as I understand.
might have been.
So it could be that, a lot, I guess the safe answer would be to say, under the new covenant, all that changed. Because lots of different things changed under the new covenant. There are scriptures that say that, I'm trying to think in the New Testament, says that a deacon or an elder or something has to be only married to one wife.
Yeah.
Remember where that is?
Mhm.
So I think that's been kind of the foundational teaching of, and then going back to the original couple, Adam and Eve. I think it was, because I think Jesus said in the beginning, he's talking about divorce, but then he says in the beginning it was not so. A man, he seemed to be very specific of saying one man and one woman.
Right.
Jesus did
It's
in his
just,
teaching.
it'd be interesting to know why the change in
Yeah.
my head, you know what I mean? Why so many things in the Old, and I know it's Jesus came,
Mhm.
he was the reason things changed. But how many things changed from the Old Testament to the New
A lot,
Testament?
thank goodness, because we were looking at stuff that said, if you, I don't know, some just ridiculous things, that the sentence was death.
Yeah,
Like, I can't remember some
Yeah, but there's a
examples,
lot
it
of
was
things
like
that
if you-
sentence should be death.
yeah, like
Jesus
murder,
said,
rape, yeah.
send them home
Well,
to
yeah,
me.
murder, but
Yeah.
I'm saying there was like things where, things that, you know, we've all done, that we should be dead for, you know.
Oh, yeah, adultery or, not that, I meant, I'm just saying. That was really bad. But I mean, what happens to those people as far as they're stoned and and the Muslims live in that? They do that, all that stuff still in their country.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah,
They
except
do
they're-
everything in the
they're
Old
pretty
Testament.
backwards, though, even
Yeah.
more than that.
And that's why they hate us, because we have Jesus.
That's why I hate
It
that.
changes what they believe. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah, that's, I was thinking of something about, related to that and I lost it, but,
That thing you were talking about earlier with the deacons, that's in 1 Timothy chapter 3, where it says, "Let the deacons be the husbands of one wife, ruling their children in their own house as well."
It's quite a ways into the new.
What's a deacon?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, deacon, yeah, but then, yeah, somebody could make the argument, well, that's only for deacons.
Right,
Not for me.
but that's saying that's the way it.
And even the
ideal.
marriage
If
ceremony.
I had to have more wives, you'd be my Sarah. My favorite.
Might be Rachel.
My Rachel, yeah, Rachel.
Well, it wasn't all bad. I mean, seriously, when you think about it, I mean, in that day and age, look at her, look at me.
I'm just like, I know how women are and
Yeah, I know.
crazy,
I think it
jealous
would be
minds, and it is
be a
not good.
nightmare.
It is not safe for you to have more than one.
Yeah, right. Well,
One is
jealousy-
enough.
You just take your turns coming to the tent.
Well, I'm not, I'm just talking in general.
You can have a 10 no back, that's just fine.
Well, and even marriage is, you know, you just, if you were covered, you were married.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
Now,
women were evil all since the beginning of time.
yeah, right. And Eve did it. Eve did it.
Well, look at, what's her name, said to her king husband, I'll let this chick dance for you, but you gotta give me John the
Yeah.
Baptist's head,
yeah,
okay? I mean, they've been evil
Well,
ever
we
since
have
the
been.
beginning of time.
yeah.
Non-Christian
She
women.
was
Yeah.
definitely-
Well, not Sarah, obviously, not Sarah.
No, but I'm being in general.
All, would you say all women?
Yeah, and all men are saints.
No,
Well, I'm just saying
not
that,
even close.
where was it in the
We're getting
Bible?
so
My
far away
sisters
from the truth that,
showed me that Adam was not accountable for the sin in the Garden of Eden, that it was Eve. There was a difference.
Yeah,
Eve was deceived, Adam disobeyed.
right,
What's the difference? Deceiving and obeying. But Adam wasn't held accountable for
I'm sure he
Eve's-
was.
Yeah, he is.
In the
because-
Bible, it says.
Well, maybe
it
not,
says it
but
right
I
in the
mean, you
Bible.
look now
Oh,
and the
yeah.
destruction that's happened because of that, because of him allowing her to have
Right.
power over him
And what are we?
instead of standing his ground. I mean,
Shows how smart the devil was.
yeah,
I'll go to Eve first because I know I
yeah,
can't fool
Yeah.
him.
right,
But I can fool her and she can fool him.
yeah.
yeah, so you could say, I guess you could say Eve's sin was that she got deceived. Adam's sin was that he failed as a
Disobeyed.
leader, and
Yeah.
that he went along
But
with
not
it.
only that she got deceived, but she had that want to have the power over her man and be the one in charge. You know, her sin also was part of that wanting to be in charge of her man.
Well, what's happening now?
Well,
Exactly.
it's women are,
Taking
I'm not
charge.
cutting down women, I'm just saying, when I was a kid, there wasn't no newswoman, you know, I mean, on TV. It was all newsmen and stuff, male man. Now there's female man. I mean,
You're the kind of guy that
I'm
Oprah
just-
Winfrey and Whoopi want to get rid of, you know that?
Yeah,
and I could care less
Yeah, I
about
can
them
hold
two
Oprah
idiots.
anytime. I can't
Yeah.
stand
You
her.
should-
Oh,
maybe
my
you should
God.
go on their program.
I
know
can't,
women.
that would be worth.
I'm speaking in general now, I mean, but you see it more and more that women are trying to, and women are emotional.
Yeah,
They're not as logical as a man. A man has got a different
Little bit
way
more
of
calm.
looking at things than a woman. And when you get women involved in certain things, it screws things up a little bit, you know? I'm
Again?
not saying,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead, no, you're a woman, go.
No, I was gonna say, The devil is using women to deceive men. They are.
Yeah. Well, and
course.
you look at like a lot of the TV shows that you see today.
Yeah.
The man is always portrayed as this pushover guy.
Yeah.
The woman's always in charge, but the man is basically kind of a worthless guy. Maybe he can sit in the corner and crack jokes or something. But
Or
that's about,
panders to his wife to make sure, you
Yeah.
know.
or all the different movies they show men as just ridiculous clowns, basically.
Yeah, but you look, I mean, women are built a lot different than a man, and a man can crave after that way a woman is. You know what I'm trying to say? In the nicest way
That
I
was
can.
Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
And that's what they got over man, is, I don't understand how somebody can wanna be with another man, wants to be with another man. What is I don't get that at all, but that's just me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Well,
nuts.
it's natural.
Well,
That's
yeah,
unnatural to be.
right,
And where does
totally.
that come from? I don't understand.
Came from,
That has to
right
be,
below us,
No, but I'm saying
the big S.
that has to be something wrong.
Hey, how many, went with Moses? I mean, how many escaped
Yeah, it
from
really is.
Egypt?
Treated like that.
I think we estimated last week there was
That,
like
you still have
2.5
the
million
ability
or
to
something.
God to say no.
That many left
You may
and
have that,
crossed
right, you know, and that's
the-
not, that, you can't help
the
it,
sea,
you know what I mean?
opened for that.
But
Wow,
it's if
that
you
had to take
follow
quite a
through
while
with
for
it.
them guys to get
Yeah,
across
that's a
there.
lot of people.
Because some-
There's
Yeah.
600,000
Men are
men, but then you add the
Right,
women and
right.
children.
More estrogen.
I was just wondering how that-
And they can't help it.
Wasn't it 40 years,
It's not
or
their
how
fault.
long were they in the
Same thing as.
desert? 40
alcohol.
years?
Some
Or was
people
it
are born
400?
with more of a
They were
tendency
40
to
years
alcohol, and
in the wilderness,
that doesn't mean you have
Okay.
to.
which is interesting because 40 and 400 are
But
kind
it's
of
weird
We all have our
Always.
struggles, we just
Since
can't
it's
get
weird that
into
Time
it.
of,
So much of it.
probation.
yeah, probation.
much.
Well, that's because it's accepted.
400, I think.
Not only
is-
accepted, but it's applauded.
Hey, Damien, or,
Celebrated now.
John just brought up a good point about the number 400. 40 is very simple, you know, it's got the 4 in it, is the number of probation or testing. I think 400 is just a larger period of testing. It's a larger 40, if you would.
Yeah, I think so too.
So maybe, you know, when you
All
look
you're
at
doing is adding
America,
1 0.
we're kind of ending a first period of major period of
Yeah.
testing.
What
How
is
we
the
doing?
one word?
Christian Overcomers is brought to you by the tithes and offerings of our listeners. If you would like to support our ministry, please go to ChristianOvercomers.com. God bless you, and thank you for your support.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible sword. His truth is marching on.